We couldn't have won World War I without allies, but even more to the point, we wouldn't have won World War II without allies. We wouldn't have won the American Revolution without the French. The complete lack of knowledge in history, even of more modern history, by this senator and people of his ilk drives me nuts. We're not interventionists because we want to ensure that we have security. What kind of America First person talks about America as colonialist, imperialist, interventionist? That it's our fault that Iran wants to destroy us, that it's our fault that North Korea wants to destroy us, that it's our fault that Putin invaded Ukraine, that it's our fault Communist China took over Hong Kong and wants to take over Taiwan. My grandfather fought at Iwo Jima. They came back different men. Still very tough, but they came back different men because you see the worst of humanity. Like the Israelis are having to deal with it now with Hamas and babies and mothers being murdered and gang rapes and all the rest. These are, I don't even call them animals. Animals don't do this sort of thing. Animals eat out of necessity. Animals do what they do instinctively. We humans are supposed to be different. We're supposed to have the ability to reason. So that Battle of Iwo Jima was a horrendous battle. Of course, you're familiar with the Marines raising the American flag and so forth. There was some moment that was captured on film. Just remember, the 80th anniversary of Iwo Jima. You have some of these battles throughout American history, whether it was in the Japanese islands, whether it was in Europe. The Civil War was unbelievable, just horrendous. Why am I telling you all this? I'm going to tell you why. Because we actually have a United States senator who posted, either earlier this week or over the weekend, that now's the time to get out of NATO. NATO. A U.S. senator. A Republican. Do you know why NATO was created, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Do you know it was to protect us? We created NATO. Europe was finished after the war. We had to rebuild Europe through the Marshall Plan. We actually rebuilt parts of Europe that we conquered to rebuild them so they would become allies and they would have democracies. Because after World War I, when our side destroyed the enemy, we left it. In fact, we pillaged, we grabbed everything we could, whatever industries were left and so forth. They decided after World War II we're going to do things a little differently, so we don't have World War III in 20 years. And which is what happened after World War I. And so you had the Marshall Plan, and we helped build up these countries that we tore down and burned down. And we put in place, we didn't just leave it, we put in place democracies, parliamentary democracies throughout Europe. And of course, you had the old Soviet Union that was trying to gobble up as much land as possible, as much of these countries as possible. And if we had just left, the Soviet Union would have controlled all of Europe, the whole damn thing. And imagine how history would be different. Very different. NATO exists not only to protect the member nations, but to protect us. We went to Europe twice. We lost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Yanks, our people, in 2 world wars. 2 world wars that were a couple decades apart. And now the weapons that we have are so much more advanced, and the weapons the enemy has are so much more advanced, you can imagine how many people would die in another war in Europe. So NATO doesn't trigger war. NATO exists to try and prevent it. The Soviet Union was defeated by Ronald Reagan without firing a bullet. He destroyed the Soviet Union, and it broke up into different pieces. And so you have NATO, which is very important. You had the Soviet Union that broke up. Ronald Reagan didn't want deals with the Soviet Union. He wanted to defeat it, but he defeated it with his smarts, through the economy, through building up weapon systems they couldn't keep up, such as the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. And he was deploying and modernizing our missile systems, which the Carter administration refused to do. And so the Soviets couldn't keep up with us. And they tried to, and they went broke, and they collapsed. Gorbachev comes to power later, and you know the whole story. So anyway, so when I hear somebody like this senator say it's time to get out of NATO, we have forward bases in Europe throughout NATO countries, particularly in Germany, but not alone. Why are those forward bases there? Not only to help our allies, but so we can project where we need to, our military might. We can't project it all the time from Norfolk, Virginia. which is where our sub bases are, as well as in San Diego, but the main one is in Norfolk, Virginia. We can't project our power all the time from NORAD or other places. And so we have a presence, a forward presence in these other countries. How do you think we deal with Southeast Asia or parts of Africa that threaten us, or terrorist regimes in the Middle East and so forth and so on? They're absolutely crucial. And if I were talking like Donald Trump, we fought for that right. We died for that right. Those bases belong to us. We didn't conquer Europe like the Soviet Union did and start taking over countries. We conquered the enemy and created free countries and a security apparatus that included us. We couldn't have won World War I without allies. But even more to the point, we wouldn't have won World War II without allies, good and bad. We wouldn't have won the American Revolution without the French. The complete lack of knowledge in history, even of more modern history, by this senator and people of his ilk drives me nuts. We're not interventionists because we want to ensure that we have security. What kind of America First person talks about America as colonialist, imperialist, interventionist? That it's our fault that Iran wants to destroy us, that it's our fault that North Korea wants to destroy us, that it's our fault that Putin invaded Ukraine, that it's our fault Communist China took over Hong Kong and wants to take over Taiwan. We need to pull in our horns, and we're told we have an ocean that separates us. An ocean that separates us. The ocean doesn't separate us from nuclear missiles, from hypersonic missiles. The ocean doesn't separate us from them attacking the electrical grid from space and destroying it, or knocking out our entire GPS system, which is our modern day radar system, with killer satellites. The ocean doesn't protect us from nuclear submarines. That's the home of nuclear submarines, of Russia's nuclear submarines, the ocean. So it doesn't protect us from that, doesn't protect us from hypersonic missiles. So does it protect us from enemies in Central or South America, or Antarctica, or places like that? Geography isn't what it used to be. It's important, don't get me wrong, but it isn't what it used to be. We're not talking about, the old days where propeller planes couldn't even get across the ocean in one flight and things of that sort. The ocean has its strengths, but it has its weaknesses, as I said, with Russian nuclear subs with nuclear warheads sitting off our shores, outside of our own navigable waters. The ocean is their home. That's what protects them. And by the way, these are the most powerful weapons on the face of the earth, our nuclear subs and their nuclear subs. And that's exactly why the Chinese are trying to build nuclear subs right now. I think they may have one, maybe two, but they're building in such a way that it's unbelievable. So Iwo Jima, these wars are a history lesson. They're a history lesson. They're a very important history lesson. World War II is an incredibly important history lesson about how fascistic regimes align with each other and build up their militaries, in this case now fascistic and communist regimes. The fascists were against the communists way back when, but today when you look at Russia and the alliance with Russia and China, apparently they have a lot in common, which is their hate for us. Anyway, I heard that and it drove me absolutely nuts that this senator doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Donald Trump used to talk about pulling out of NATO. He never intends to pull out of NATO. He understands what I understand. He wanted these European member countries to spend more of their GDP on NATO. Otherwise, why would he care? If he wants to pull out of NATO, what do we give a damn what they spend on defense, right? He used to say, we're going to spend this, you're going to spend this, or we're not spending money and we may leave NATO. In fact, we're going to leave NATO. But he would never leave NATO. He has never taken any steps. He does want to reduce our presence in terms of the number of military personnel. It's really a pittance when you look at the overall picture of things. And what have we gotten from NATO since it was formed after World War II? What have we gotten? Peace. There hasn't been World War III, and it's done a pretty damn good job, especially now that we expect the Europeans to put in the amount of money that they're supposed to spend in. So NATO isn't a globalist adventure, an internationalist adventure. NATO is our own self-interest and self-defense. That's why we created it. That's why we were behind it. Because we had just fought the second most horrendous war in our history, the Civil War being our first. Very, very important to understand this. Okay, so 80th anniversary of Iwo Jima. You see where it led me.
For all this and much more, sign up for Levin TV.